Socialist Fulcrum, September 1969. Ideology by Bill Pritchard. The ultimate subjugation of the oppressed occurs in the ideological or cultural realm. A social system can maintain its repressive effectiveness only so long as the oppressed share the fundamental ethos of the oppressors. Antonio Gramsci, a staunch opponent of Mussolini's fascism. He died in prison a quarter of a century ago. The ruling ideas of each age have ever been the ideas of its ruling class, Marx and Engels. These two quotations carry the same implication. A ruling class maintains its position by imposing on, or imparting to, its oppressed those ideas which reflect or are in keeping with the material interests of the rulers. Contemporary society provides overwhelming evidence of this. The predatory activities of the capitalist powers today, armed with the most sophisticated weaponry for wholesale destruction, seeking new spheres of influence, trade routes, sources of raw materials, etc., or, conversely, trying to prevent their rivals from access thereto, is now painfully evident, as witnessed the imperialistic adventures of the U.S. in SE Asia, Santo Domingo, and elsewhere. Witness also, and for the same basic material considerations that prompted Britain's colonialism and its white man's burden and America's manifest destiny, the recent invasion and occupation of Czechoslovakia by the armed forces of the Soviet Union and its lickspittle satellites. This spectacle of the military jackboot trampling over its one-time ally was conducted in the name of Marxism-Leninism does not make it any less foul or infamous, and the denunciation by America was but an instance of the pot admonishing the kettle. That the U.S. should suddenly discover that the state apparatus of Czechoslovakia was being administered by liberals, Dubček and Slavoba, leading their country to freedom and democracy, would appear comical were it not so tragic. The apostles of liberty were pressured by the needs of a deteriorating economy and the criticisms of its own students and workers into moving away from the Russian bear and in the direction of the throbbing economy of West Germany. The economic volcano of the Ruhr Valley was a much better bet than a continued reliance on Moscow. The Czech ploy to West Germany challenged the Soviet Union. Its East European hegemony was threatened, so socialist troops invaded the territory of a sister socialist state. Were any evidence needed to demonstrate that the state capitalism of Russia and the free enterprise of the US are basically similar to this invasion, paralleling US action in Santo Domingo should suffice. Yet, despite all this evidence of the predatory nature of capitalism, the working force of society, the oppressed of each capitalist state, and the source and creator of all wealth, by and large, sees its interest to be only in the maintenance and development of the very system which holds it in bondage. The possession and control of society's economic machinery is guaranteed by the political institution, the state. With this political control, the ruling class possesses also control of the means of communication and information, news media, TV and radio, the institutions of education, and the religious apparatus. By distorting history, pseudoscientific economics, the humanistic, hypocritical picture of the nation as one happy family where harmony should prevail and violence be non-existent, the ruling clique is enabled to so indoctrinate the oppressed that the notion that here is the best of all possible systems in the best of all possible worlds is held by a majority of the populace. In short, we never had it so good. With political power and control of the means of communication, sanctioned by the majority which shares the fundamental ethos of the oppressors, in the hands of the minority ruling class, how can the repressive effectiveness of the master class be challenged and negated? The answer lies in convincing the majority that its interests, and in fact that of all society, demands a change in its ideology, that it must come to see that poverty amidst affluence, continued aggression against small and ill-developed countries containing valuable raw materials, etc., shall be brought to an end, and that the emancipation of all mankind be achieved through the conquest of political power, now held by the aggressive minority by an enlightened majority having undergone an ideological revolution. The ideas of this new era will be the ideas of its majority made to function in the interest of that majority. Although the current scene shows today's ideas to be the ideas of its ruling class, it discloses also other features. It is becoming increasingly apparent that capital is its own contradiction, as Marx puts it, and that the contradictions inherent in the system are becoming more obvious as the system develops. This appears to be increasingly evident among today's youth, confused and perplexed, given to fighting effects rather than searching for and uncovering root causes, frittering away valuable time and energy in demonstrations and protests. The dissident youth today are getting the new idea that their masters' and parents' politics are phony, a sham battle between windy opponents standing basically for the same thing, that the educational institutions are also phony, designed not to educate but to manufacture cogs for the machinery of the modern industrial complex, and furthermore that their religious mentors are finding it difficult to make their sophistry convincing, that ecclesiastical authority is waning, and that the Pope even is caught in the cleft stick between the weight of tradition and the pressure of social needs. In short, today's youth discern some mighty fractures in the walls of capitalism's Jericho. What then does this rebellion portend? The rebellion of the ghetto youth, the hippie subculture, the questionings of the college students. While attempting to sympathetically understand these protests, no informed socialist would be so naive as to imagine the negative attitude, the turning of the back on society, as is done by the hippies, could seriously develop that dynamic necessary to achieve a social transformation, or that the understandable defiance of the ghetto, the burning, looting, and confrontation with police power could lead in that direction, or that the hysteria, slogans, and demonstrations of students could be counted on. These may leave some impact on the societal superstructure, but nonetheless cannot produce the necessary basic changes. In the last analysis, all this shadow boxing cannot develop a considered and disciplined assault upon capitalism's establishment. What is required is to convince the majority that this system is bankrupt, intellectually and morally, that Lil's profit motive must be replaced by a higher social concept, production for use, that nationalism must give way to the idea of lone human family in one world, and to further demonstrate that none of these concepts and ideas appear in the hysteria and turmoil of the current unrest. Yet these protesters and demonstrators, mostly young, are in rebellion against the establishment, the status quo. What then should be the attitude of the dedicated and informed socialist to this phenomenon, to this evident searching and yearning of modern youth? First, I think a sympathetic understanding of these problems as the young conceive then is necessary. Then our appeal should be made devoid even of a mere suggestion at opposition of aggression or hostilities. Rather, our stance should be that of a dedicated and patient teacher dealing with an eager, inquiring, but frustrated pupil, respecting the hippies and their subculture, with the diggers attempting to create an economic subsystem in which necessary goods would be distributed free. Again, understanding is required, not in a reversion to those simple methods of production and distribution, but in the realization that the technological machinery of today can more than supply society's needs, and that such machinery can become the productive power of society, controlled by society, and for society through the conquest by an enlightened majority of political power. What is now required of socialists is a patient teaching of the nature of capitalism, a clear view of historical development, a critical analysis of the economics of today's system, and a realization that the real interests of the majority in this society stand in basic opposition to those of the ruling minority. In an understanding of the system, its workings, and how it is now controlled lies the basis of the road to power and consequent freedom. Not in hysterical demonstrations, the shouting of slogans, the shadow boxing of the protesters can the path be cleared so that the ideas ruling society may be superseded by the new ideas of the enlightened majority, not in burning, looting, or leading frustrated dissidents into confrontations with the police power, but in gaining knowledge, wisdom, and understanding lies the way to real social progress. Of this we must convince the young. This is our clear and present task. No lasting physical revolution of consequence in the interest of the majority, and therefore of all mankind, can occur until a revolution has taken place in the thought processes of that majority itself.